Someone said these remind them of Iron Man. Well, certainly that colour scheme does. But here we have Campfire Audio's EOs, which are their new $299 dual balanced armature model. They have much the same kind of design with a few improvements over the original Andromeda. And kind of just for fun, here's an original Andromeda. Very original. This one doesn't have the extra kind of chamfers carved into the side of the casing, so it's very original. The other kind of improvement that's very noticeable is the nozzle you see is a little bit longer and thinner, so it's easier to get a deeper fit. You get an extra millimeter or two compared to, well, the Andromeda. And most people were fine with this design. Some people who have small ears were not. So it's very easy nowadays, with plenty of them out there, to see if this kind of IEM will fit you. Speaking of ergonomics, though, they have a new wire-free over-ear cable connected with the good old MMCX connector. And being wire-free, it's kind of more comfortable. No needing to carefully snip the plastic and get the wire out, as a lot of people did. I was one of those people too who just didn't like the wire. So that you could adjust, I guess, with a hairdryer to warm it up, and then it will probably fit to a new design if desired. But other than that, you have a your good silver-plated copper cable with the choker already halfway up the cable as I was wearing it. Metal splitter, and this one is terminated in 3.5mm, which is all you need. One other thing, of course, they came with a case and some... I hadn't thought much about the case. Oh, okay, it's a nice case. The older Campfire audio cases, if you'd already seen them, were these nice kind of harder style ones. This newer one looks very, well, someone said it looks very kind of feminine. So it's much the same thing inside as we already saw. But maybe some guys will not be really enthusiastic about carrying this, whereas before they'd be more enthusiastic about carrying this. So that's one advantage that the FIO IEMs had, is they came with two different cases. You get a hard case and a soft case, and the soft case looked pretty cool. And didn't look particularly masculine or feminine. Feminine was just grey. These are nice cases, but some people are just not going to go with this style. They're very, very easy to drive, and all they need really is a source with a close to zero output impedance, and you're done. So with that and the new design, they also come with 3 sets of tips, as you saw. Good old foam tips, which probably give you the deepest insert, so I have to pop one of those on there. They'll get you furthest into your ear for a good seal. They also block the most noise. You have your final Type E tips, which I don't know if they provide any particular benefit with the dynamic driver IEMs or hybrid IEMs. The narrower nozzle in the tip will affect the bass, but not so much with balanced armatures, or almost not at all. They reduce the treble slightly, very, very slightly. Then you have these rubber tips, which are interesting because they seem to slide up. They can slide all the way down, giving you no nozzle, which is probably better than not, but there you lose some of your insertion depth. Well, it ends up looking more like Andromedas. But I don't know if that would stay up when you're inserting them. Who knows? But that's what you get, and you saw that in the unboxing video, which you can check out if you want to see all the fancy box they come in too. And in general, they're kind of very bright and with not so much bass. And they have a little bit of... Someone's measured a bit of a wonky sound signature to them, and this has caused some controversy. Not the measurements, but the sound. Although we have to be a little bit cautious on measurements, something that was very apparent was that overall, there's a lot of focus on the treble, a lot, and some mid-bass, and the mid-range is kind of not quite right. And with some music they were okay, and with some music they sounded, well, yeah, a bit off. And this resulted in some very mixed impressions. So someone who's used to darker and bass-strong stuff would find these completely wrong to start with, whereas someone who likes a lighter sound signature would think, oh, well, that's not too bad, but maybe have mixed opinions. So, for example, I have a playlist called the Number 82 playlist, which people who are familiar with my videos will know. People who are not, it's a playlist of tracks I now use for evaluation, although I don't use all the tracks. And it covers enough variety of music that I can make out the general performance characteristics of headphones, IEMs, and other gear. So the first of those tracks is by Jeff Beck. It's from way back from the 1970s, called Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. And I like this old track because it, apart from just that I can evaluate things, it has, you can hear the depth of the, you can hear where the instruments are, you can hear how far back they are from the microphones. And depending on the gear you use, if the more depth you can hear, you know that the gear is better. And through the EOs, the main guitar, strangely enough, came through as a bit distant, and more with the higher notes being prominent. So the cymbals are actually quite in your face through the EOs. Now the bass guitar doesn't come through quite so strongly, and the thing that was maybe disappointing was that drum impacts don't have the kind of thump that you get with, say, dynamic driver IEMs or even other warmer IEMs. Another track, say Hollow Talk by the Choir of Young Believers, which is a modern, actually for a modern track, pretty well recorded. And again, sounds a bit tipped up towards the treble, and the focus ends up very much on the singer's voice. And singers' voices through the EO didn't have, a lot of body. They sounded kind of very light. And again, instruments too, given that we're kind of hitting the similar kind of notes, seemed to lack body as well. They didn't have depth to them, so they were kind of thinner sounding. And the bass especially was somewhat cut off. Now the treble that is delivered is very pleasant, but I tend to use gear that has very lack of harshness. And generally these days it's very unusual to have harsh sounding IEMs, so not such a surprise. And with very bright IEMs, you're going to notice anything that's problematic with the treble. Good old Santana, Oye Como Va. And, thankfully I didn't burn out in this track when I was younger, although some people who commented on Radio Paradise certainly did, obviously, and don't like hearing it anymore. Again, the percussion is more distant, but the guitars were crisp and pleasant, without any harshness, which was good. Massive Attack's Angel, and you can probably guess what the result of this is going to be. It's what I call one of my first bass test tracks, and, well, you can hear the rumble, but it's weak, and not a good match at all. Something like the Atlas is way better IEMs for this kind of track where you get that thundering bass. Hey Lion by Sophie Tucker, which is a dance track, and actually is a pretty cool dance track, I reckon. It's also a bass test. It tests mid-bass. Now, surprisingly, actually, this sounds pretty punchy out of these. And you get snappy percussion, real great dynamics out of them. And it's not something I want to listen loud to because of the bright treble out of these. That would just instant hearing damage. It actually does present it pretty well. We also have a track with very low bass rumble from the new Basement tapes. It's when I Get My Hands on You. And you can hear the low rumble on this track, but yep, it's weak, as to be expected. The most prominent, again, the vocals and percussion. And it doesn't give quite the depth of sound stage that you get with more expensive IEMs, but at least everything tend to be free of harshness. And vocals come through cleanly. And again, it was much the same kind of thing. I have one whole Neil Young track I like. One whole one. I don't usually listen to Neil Young. It's called Old Man. And now I turn up the volume a bit more for this. And it's being an older track. It doesn't have a lot of bass, but actually it's fairly light sounding, as I said, to begin with, but actually works reasonably well with the EO and is pleasant. But same story with the vocals. They're kind of lacking kind of body in that sense. And again, we have Arlington by the Wailing Jennies, which is a very full-bodied track, but it still comes through on the light side, or especially with the vocals and instruments, but was actually quite good through the EO. The problem was it was a bit strong in the kind of upper mids, lower treble, which is where there seems to have been a peak on someone's measurements, and it makes it tiring to listen to, which is not so good. And so in general, there was just that very light sound, vocals sounding very light and lacking in body. Some mid bass there, which was pretty good, but the low bass lacking. And that kind of weirdness in the mids that sometimes kind of the upper mids sounded, too strong and fatiguing. So, compared to other IEMs, the Shozy CP, they are cheaper, of course, at $165, and Shozy tends to be really good value. They are a kind of light sounding pair of IEMs, but they're not so tipped up on the treble that they're irritating, and they don't have quite the dynamics of the EO, so they're more even sounding but kind of less dynamic, and they're kind of more easily listenable for a pair of not bass strong multiple balanced armature IEMs. And so I tend to find these more listenable, and they do have a bit of a different setup, which I'll talk about in the video about them, and different tips and different characteristics in that regard. But I found these more listenable, whereas the EOs had better dynamics, if at the penalty of that kind of weird upper mid sound. Another obvious one around the same price mark, Feo's FH5s. These are better all-rounders. They're actually, of course, a hybrid IEM, and they have that bass thump that you need, although not the absolute cleanest treble, and they do have a bit of upper mid strength, which can be maybe a little bit uncomfortable as well. I've reviewed these. You can actually check out my review of them. They also very easily endlessly swivel, unlike the EO ones, which are a little bit don't. If you compare them to these, if I get left and right organized correctly, which I don't know my left and right, you know that, then, well, they're a little bit more of a smoother design, and then if we can get the cable out of the way, they're kind of very, well, chunky, but more smooth gradients rather than your kind of straight lines in the EO, but they're actually not too radically different in size. A little bit bigger because they smooth everything out. But these are a better all-round balance, but don't have maybe quite as nice treble as the EOs do. But the EOs are let down by that weird peak coming in the upper mids kind of range. Out of different components, I mean, how well do they scale? Should I buy an expensive DAP to use with them if you do like them? I have a Shanling M2X here in for review. Also have a Feo's got an M9 in here as well. And these are, if you can, with basic IEMs, if you can tell these two apart, well then the IEMs are actually pretty decent, I reckon. So with the M2X, yep, sound was pretty good. And I played some other music through this in the M9, and there was definitely a step up going from the M2X to the M9 with better, instrument separation, a little bit better detail. The M2X is kind of down the range where people might say, maybe they can get a smartphone which sounds as good or better nowadays. Who knows? But it's something I'll cover in the review. The M9 seems to be a step up from it. And I also have in for review the M11, which I played the same music through as well. And that was a step up as well. So definitely distinct increase in instrument detail and separation going to the M9. To the M11, it felt like a little bit better as well. And was starting to hit the limit of the kind of improvement in sound that was possible with a high quality recording track. And I didn't go higher than that. I mean, I could have gone up to, multiple $1,000 DAPs, and maybe there would be a tiny improvement of something like a Chord Hugo 2 or whatever. But I think around in this price range, buying something kind of fairly semi-decent would be a good match with these, as generally DAPs nowadays are good at sounding. So if that's you're considering equipment, get something somewhere kind of in the basically decent, should be a good match with these. So the EO, well, nice improvements on the cable and the design and that kind of thing, but these are just not going to be a great match for a lot of people, and including me. Primarily it was that weird treble mid balance that was a little bit off. I mean, you can live, you're going to, with two balanced armatures, you're not going to get thunderous bass. It's just a given. A single dynamic driver will probably more likely give you that. But for someone who likes light sounding IEMs, who really likes their percussion dynamics, likes that brighter sound, doesn't need a lot of bass, maybe a few people out there will be really enjoy these, and of course they do look absolutely fantastic. So in the end, not quite there with the sound. Everything else is really nice. It was just that one particular area that seems to have caused a lot of disagreement and dislike. But a few people out there who really like the percussion seem to like these. So what have I missed? Anything? Any thoughts? Did you try them? If you did, or you have any thoughts about them, please do leave a comment below. Criticism is okay. I'm interested in constructive criticism. Also, don't forget that these videos were made thanks to the support of the people whose names you see on screen and many others. Now, these people got to see this video in advance without ads. If you would consider being kind enough to do something like buy me a coffee once in a while, for that kind of price, you could actually become a supporter and help me make these videos. So check the links on screen for information about that. And thanks once again, and I'll see you online.